Once you finally understand Excel formulas and functions, in the next hour, you will learn how formulas work, how to avoid common errors, and how cell referencing really functions in real spreadsheets. In our full course, you will go much further, mastering advanced functions and automating Excel tasks step by step. You will find it linked in the description. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Excel course and our introductory lesson where I will be reviewing how to open Excel. We'll take a look at the difference between workbooks and worksheets, and then I will provide you with an overview of the Excel workspace. Now, Excel can be opened from your Start menu, from your taskbar, or from the application list. Excel runs on different platforms, so the icon that you see on your screen may vary slightly. So some of these are from a Windows-based application or platform. Some of these are from, for instance, an Android tablet or an Apple iOS device. So there might be different ways, or what you see on your screen might vary, but you should always see this Excel icon. That's how you know this is Excel. And from there, you would be able to open the application from your device. Now, within Excel, you have the concept of what's called a workbook versus a worksheet. A workbook is the actual Excel file that can contain one or more worksheets that have tabs that differentiate each worksheet. So, for instance, if you were in your File Explorer in Windows, you might see a list of your Excel files that looks like this. So even though over here it says Microsoft Excel Worksheet, this is actually the workbook that can contain multiple worksheets. Now, the worksheet is the actual grid of cells within the Excel workbook that's used to enter data, formulas, and functions, and to present results of calculations. So when you have an Excel worksheet, it would look more like this. And this is what we'll take a look at when we get into the workspace. Now, if you are working in Excel, you can switch between multiple workbooks. You can have multiple workbooks open, as well as you can have multiple worksheets within your workbook. So you'll see here, this is what you might see, different sheets open at the bottom of the screen in your workbook, and it also has a plus sign for you to create an additional workbook if you need to. And if you have multiple workbooks open, then within Excel, in the window menu, you can select the switch windows option and then go back and forth between the different workbooks that you may have open. Starting with the Excel interface, first thing you'll see when you open up a workbook is the title bar at the top of the screen. The title bar displays the name of the workbook, the quick access, the search bar. Below that, you have the menu bar. The menu bar will display the different menu options, and whenever you first open Excel, it will start off in the home menu because that has the most commonly used Excel features. Underneath that, for each menu item within each menu group, there is a ribbon that contains specific functionality for that group. And we will look at that. So as you click on each of the different menu options, the ribbon will change and you'll have different functionality within each of the menu groups. The Excel menu is also dynamic. Sometimes, depending on a certain component that you select, for instance, a table, a chart, pivot table, you may see additional menu options that come at the end of the menu bar, and those have specific types of functions that you can use for those types of components. So we will see how those get used later on in the course. Toolbar is a way for you to access frequently used commands such as the save, undo, redo, print. So you have the option of deciding or selecting different functions or commands that you use often. So rather than you having to search for them throughout the menu bar, through the menu group, you can access them through your quick access toolbar. So that allows customization. You can customize the toolbar to include commands that best fit your preferences. And then once you click the down arrow, you can select the option in the list based on the items that you save to your quick access toolbar. Continuing on with the interface, we're going to look at the formula bar, columns, rows, cells, and the name box. So the formula bar, which you'll see highlighted here, displays the contents of the active cell, and it allows the user to enter and edit text, numbers, formulas, and functions. Columns are represented by the letters that appear under the formula bar. So you'll see here A, B, C goes off to, I forget the last column, XX something. So there's a lot of columns that are included in your spreadsheet. On the left, you have your rows. Rows are represented by the numbers that appear on the left of the worksheet. And then the intersection of your columns and rows are what's called a cell. And a cell is referred to by a letter number combination, such as A1. The name box right above column A here displays the active cell. So in this case, because we are, as you can see by that frame, we're in cell A1. That's what you see in the name box. Also, if we have the ability to give a cell a name, and you can decide, for instance, if you have a field or cell that you want to use for, let's say, tax percent, you could actually give it a name. So rather than referring to it by the cell name, the row and the column and row, you can refer to it by name. And if you do have any cells that have been named, you will also see them in this name box. At the bottom of the worksheet, you have the status bar, the worksheet tabs, and the view options. So let's start with the status bar, which you'll see down in the lower left. The status bar displays information about the worksheet and provides other information about cells, macros, and other Excel components. So it might show you, for instance, if you were calculating or a macro was doing a calculation, you might see the status of that macro down here in the status bar. If you're filtering information from data in your table, you might see something that shows you how many rows were returned in that filter option. So that's the status bar. Above that, you have your worksheet tabs, as I had mentioned earlier. So in this case, we see the active worksheet that's highlighted there. It allows for creation of new worksheets by clicking the plus button, provides the ability to manipulate and copy worksheets. So I can drag worksheets back and forth into different locations. There's also an option if you right click on the tab, then you have a menu that comes up where you can then do some additional changes and updates to the worksheet tab. On the right-hand side, you have your view and zoom controls. So these provide different options for changing the view of a worksheet and zooming in or out of a worksheet. And we're going to take a look at all of that now by going over into Excel. So here's my Excel worksheet where we're going to do a little bit more review of the interface to cover the topics that we just saw in the presentation. And then we'll go into getting a better understanding of formulas versus functions and some things with common Excel errors, learn the referencing techniques, and we're going to take a look at a simple budget sheet so we can demonstrate additional formula function concepts. But what we're going to do first is we're going to start with the interface. So as I mentioned before, we have your menu bar at the top where you can click on it and then you'll see additional functionality for each menu bar specific to that menu will then be displayed in the ribbon that appears underneath it. Because Home has a lot of the more commonly used functions, that's what you'll see when you first open a worksheet. This is your quick access toolbar, as it says customize quick access toolbar. So I can click on that. I can see the items that I have as my quick access. So I have the automatically save. You'll see my auto save is on. The save button will appear here. I have quick print, which is this icon that you see here. And then these are my undo and redo buttons. If I want to see more options, I can just click on, for instance, if I wanted to have the new button, where when I want to create a new worksheet, I could click on that. And then I get this icon here to show that I can create a new worksheet document workbook by clicking on that icon. And you'll see here, I've just created a new workbook by clicking on new. I'm just going to close that because I don't need it right now. Okay. Now, as I had mentioned before, you have the different formatting options here. At the bottom, you have your worksheets. So in this workbook, I have several worksheets. You can do a few things with the worksheets here. If you hover over on the left-hand side, you'll see that I have two options there. The first one says control and left click. So if I do a control and then hit the left click button, okay, I can go to a specific worksheet. Actually, let me do it this way. I'll start this way with the right click. The right click will bring up a menu or a dialog box that allows you to go directly to another sheet. So if I want to if I want to go to my budget sheet, I can click on that. And then you'll see now my active worksheet is the budget sheet. Okay. And if I want to go back to a specific or back to the beginning of the sheets. So for instance, now I went over to the budget sheet, which was several worksheets over from the first worksheet in my workbook. I do the control left click and it brings me back to the beginning or the first worksheet that's in my spreadsheet here. So that's another way that I can move back and forth within the workbook. I can also click the arrow here, which then again, just you'll see at the bottom, you'll see the worksheets start to move across, which will then allow me to click on another sheet within my workbook. So this is just allowing me to scroll back and forth within the workbook. If I right click, as I said before, you'll see I have some additional menu options that I can choose. If I want to rename a worksheet, I can do it here. I can insert a new sheet. Let's say I want to create a new sheet here. I can just click on that and now you'll see there's a new sheet. That sheet would then appear to the left of the worksheet that I clicked on. I can drag this, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it with my left mouse and just drag it. And you can see I can move it to different locations within my workbook. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it again is if I right click on it, if I say move or copy, then I have the option of moving that sheet to another location. So let's say I want to move it before this particular sheet. When I click OK, now it's moved it over to in front of that worksheet. So this is just, again, just showing you that there's different things you can do with the worksheet itself. Change color. If I wanted it to be a different color, I can change that. There might be reasons why I want to hide a worksheet if I decide that maybe there's some information that I don't want people to see until a certain point, or maybe I don't want them to see it at all, so I can hide it. I can also protect it where I can put a password so that people aren't able to see it unless they put a password in. So there's a few things you can do with your worksheets here. Moving on, this is the status bar, as I mentioned. So you can see that there's some additional information here. I don't have any macros in this particular one, so you won't see any information about that. But you've got some information that my worksheet is, I'm in ready mode, ready to begin working. And there's other things like accessibility that it can give you some additional information on. More importantly, over to the right, you'll see that there are some, these icons that you see here are to change the layout of the worksheet. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go back to my very first worksheet actually. So we're going to right click. I'm going to click on that worksheet. So now we're back to the first one. This is the normal view. So what you see right now in that first one is the regular normal view where you'll see the columns and the rows and the data in that sheet. If I click on page layout, what that does is it allows me to see what my worksheet will look like if I'm going to send it to a printer. So if I decide I want to print my spreadsheet and I want to see what it looks like before I send it to the printer, I can click on page layout and that'll give me that view. And then I can also get the page break preview. So if I had a spreadsheet, I'm going to use this one because there's a little bit more data. I'll do one with a little bit more data in it. Okay, I'll use this one. If I wanted one that shows me where the page breaks will be, if I'm going to send this to the printer, I can click on the page break preview. So you'll see here, I've got page 1, all right, and then as you scroll down, you can see there's a break here, and now it's showing me page 2. So if I wanted to maybe even get an idea of how many pages were going to be printed for a spreadsheet before I sent it to the printer, I could take this view as well and see what the page breaks will look like. This also allows you to change where the page breaks are. So you'll see here, I could decide that instead of it being down that far, I could move it up a little bit. Okay, and that might change the rest of the spreadsheet, the way it prints. That is another option that you have when you are in the page break preview. All right, now I'm going to go back to my normal view and then go back to the very first spreadsheet. And then let's take it off of that view. All right, so now we're back to normal. The last thing I'm going to show is, if you'll notice on the right-hand side here, this is your zoom option, and I have the ability to zoom in or out. Right now I'm actually zoomed into 120%, so I can either click the minus button to take the view down to smaller view. Of course, plus button will take it up to a larger view. I can move this tab left or right to move it larger or smaller. Okay, you can see that there. And then I can also click on the scale, the percentage, and I can change it to a different amount here. I can do 75, 100, or I can customize it and I can put my own number in there. And then now I've got 85% view. Now, in Excel, because Excel, its primary purpose is to do a lot of calculations and reporting, doing some complex things you wouldn't be able to do on your own. You have the ability to do manual formulas, which means you can enter the formulas yourself using the different operators and cell references within a worksheet, or you can do built-in formulas. These are formulas that are predefined that can do complex calculations. They have specific purposes, but they simplify it for you because you don't have to really know how the formula is done. All you have to do is provide the parameters that are needed for the formula to be executed. And you also have the ability to nest formulas and functions together. So you can even create more complex calculations by mixing and matching formulas and functions that are built in and coming up with calculations that can be very powerful. All right, so with a formula, the formulas are user created calculations. So you can take operators, and the operators that are used in Excel are the plus sign for addition, the hyphen or minus sign for subtraction. Multiplication is done by using the asterisk. Division is done by using the forward slash. And if you need to raise something to the power, something squared, for instance, you use the caret. Now, in this case, as an example of doing a calculation, this is looking at, or is using equals B2 divided by 5. So every formula or function in Excel always begins with the equal sign. That's the trigger that Excel uses to know that this anything coming after it is some type of a calculation that has to be performed. In this case, with this formula, it would use whatever value is in cell B2 and divide it by 5 using the forward slash. Now, functions are the built-in operations that simplify complex calculations with, as it says, predefined syntax. So, for instance, here, this formula or this function, I should say, it's called sum. Sum, just as it sounds, is to add numbers together. And the format would be you would put the equal sign, the name or the function name, and within parentheses, you put the parameters that are required for it to do the calculation. Each formula comes with its own set of predefined syntax and parameters that are needed. And so as long as you put in the right information, then you will get the right results out of your function. So this is one of the simpler ones, equal sum. We're going to see this one a lot. So what this is looking at, it's looking at the cells from A2 to G9. So this colon that's in between means that this is a range of cells. So the sum formula is going to be using several cells, the values that are in several cells to do its calculation. And in this case, it's going to be looking at the value that's in A2 as well as anything from A2 to G9. So we'll look at that and we'll see how that gets used to perform this type of a calculation. Another example I had mentioned about nested formulas or nested functions. If is a function that will return a true or a false depending on whether or not a value is true or false. So if the sum of A2 to G9 is greater than or equal to 50, this is how that would be represented in an if statement or in this if formula function. And then if that's true, it would write true in that cell, otherwise it would write false. Now, when you create formulas and functions, there's always a chance of running into errors. So there are some common Excel errors that you might see when you do these functions and formulas. So we want to look at what those are so you have an idea of what they might mean in case you enter a function and you see one of these errors. And we just want to make sure you understand what the error means and how you can fix it. And also just talking about some best practices that you can do to ensure that you avoid those errors in the first place. All right, one of the errors you might see is what they call a divide by zero error. And this is format or what that error would look like. You'll see it has that pound sign, the letters div, a forward slash, a zero, and an exclamation point. It's kind of the way most of the errors are formatted or what they look like in Excel. So, for instance, if you were to try to divide something by zero, this is the error that you will see. That happens to be a very common mistake in spreadsheets. So, for instance, if you were referring to a cell that was either empty or there was a zero in that cell and you tried to divide by the value of that cell, you may get this divide by zero error. Invalid reference error, where you see here this pound ref exclamation point, that's a reference. That's whenever you do a formula or a function that's referring to a cell that's invalid. Maybe you deleted a row or a column, or you moved some data to a different place. So now you see that reference error. So you would need to ensure that your formula is referring to valid content. Here's another one where you might have errors based on data type or name. Value, you get the value error. It appears for incorrect data types. So that could be where a formula is expecting a number, but you gave it text and it doesn't know how to handle text. So it's telling you that there's incorrect data. The type of data you entered is incorrect. This name occurs with unrecognized function names. You try to use a function that doesn't exist, so it gives you that name error. You may also get an NA error when some value is not available. So maybe you're expecting to get some data based on a function that you entered, but it's not finding what you're looking for, so you get the NA error. And the spill error, this is kind of a newer one. It's applicable to Microsoft 365 only, so these are for the newer versions of Excel. We'll take a look at this more later on, but this can occur if you have what they call a dynamic array formula, and then the contents don't get entered into only one cell. The data spills into multiple cells. But if you have something blocking where that cell needs to spill into, then you get this spill error. Filter, there's a filter function, and there's other function that use dynamic arrays. We're going to get into that more in chapter 4, but I wanted to at least introduce it that this is another error that you might run into in Excel. Several ways that you can try to avoid errors. Logical formula structure. Make sure that your formulas clearly or organized clearly to improve readability and maintainability in spreadsheets. Essentially, there are ways for you to enter formulas or functions, especially functions that guide you into the parameters that need to be entered and the type of information that's expected. So if you follow those guidelines and the guidance, then your chances of having an error usually will be reduced. You still may run into errors, but at least you starting off with the right structure will at least help you improve your chances of avoiding errors. As it says, there's some common errors you can avoid. The divide by zero error is one of those. So it says identify and prevent typical formula mistakes to reduce errors and improve accuracy. So always start with the equal sign if you're trying to do a formula or a function. Make sure that the cell reference is accurate and the cell contains the kind of data that you're expecting. If it needs a number, then it's a number. There are text functions as well. And so if you're doing a text function, make sure that the function has text or the cell has text for that function. There's some Excel auditing features that might help you check, and debug formulas efficiently. So we will take that look at those in a later chapter when we examine some of the different ways of telling or evaluating whether there are errors in your worksheets. What we refer to here are relative cell referencing, absolute cell referencing, and mixed cell referencing. The relative cell referencing means that whenever I type a formula or function and I use a cell reference like A2 or B2, when I copy that formula to a different cell, then the reference will change relative to the cell that I'm copying that formula to. We'll show you exactly how this works. Relative cell referencing is actually the default. So if you refer to cell A1 and you copy it another row, let's say, it may automatically change cell A1 to A2 because now you've moved down one cell from where you were when you started where you began the formula. So it actually will update the cell reference to make it match to the new location where you moved it to. Absolute cell referencing means that whenever I copy a cell reference or a copy a formula to a new place, I've made it so that the cell reference will be fixed. So it will not change when I copy that cell from one place to another. And then the mixed cell reference means that I can decide maybe I need the column to stay fixed, but the rows can change, or the rows can stay fixed, but the columns can change. Okay, so this indicates that either a column or a row should remain fixed when copying from one cell to another. So the way we tell Excel to handle this cell referencing is we use a dollar sign in front of the column or row to show which one of them should not change when we copy that formula or that whatever's in that cell from one cell to another. So in this case, A5 without any dollar signs would be considered a relative reference. So if I copy a formula that refers to cell A5 to a new place, A5 can change. And in that case, there might be reasons why we want it to change. So having a relative reference is okay. And as I said, that is the default operation. If I put a dollar sign in front in front of the A and a dollar sign in front of the 5, that's considered an absolute reference. That means that when I copy that formula from one place to another, that cell A5 will not change. So my formula will always refer to A5. And in this case, with the dollar in front of the A or the dollar in front of the 7, that would be considered a mixed reference. So I might be copying something where I need the row to change, but I don't want the column to change. So that is another way of being able to handle cell referencing. All right, so now we covered a lot of things. So what I want to do now is I want to go into Excel and we'll start looking at the difference between the formulas and functions. We'll look at the error handling, or at least take a quick look at what kinds of errors you might be able to get in Excel. And then we're going to look at cell referencing. Okay, so now we're going to look at the differences between a formula and a function. As I mentioned before, the formula is user created and the function is built in. So here we have a few examples of a formula. So I'm not actually doing the calculation right now, but I just want you to see what it would look like. In this case, equals A3 plus B3 would look at whatever content is in cell A3 and then add it to B3. And so that would be considered a purely arithmetic formula. I can also do, for instance, equals C4 times 0.075. So I'm actually taking a calculation of the content or the value that's in C4 and multiplying it by 7.5%. So that's a manual percentage calculation. Equals, in parentheses, D5 minus E5 divided by the content of what's, or the value what's in F5. So in this case, it's going to do the subtraction between the value of what's in D5 minus the value of what's in E5, and then dividing it by F5. So that's calculates a ratio. And here you can see where we're combining two different operations. So we have a subtraction and a division here. And then this one, we're actually doing more of a logical comparison. So if I had whatever the contents of G6 is, I can take that value and I can, I'm asking or I'm looking to say whether or not it is greater than 100. So it would return a true or false in this case. So we're doing a logical comparison. Now the rest of these are functions. So within a function, this is where you are actually determining or selecting a function to do some type of calculation for you. And the way that a function works, number one, you start with the equal sign, you name the name of the function, in parentheses, you put in the parameters that it's looking for, and then once you hit enter, you get your result. So in this one, sum is going to add a range of cells. Average is going to give you the average of these the values within these cells. As we mentioned before, with an if statement, I can check to see this is conditional logic. So I'm saying if the value that's in C3 is greater than 100, I want you to put the word high in the cell. Otherwise, I want you to put the word low. And here we're doing a rounding. I can take a value and then I can round it by several decimals. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go over to this budget sheet, and we already have a few formulas in here already. So I want to show you what this would look like if I were using any of those formulas that we were looking at before. So first off, I have here some categories, okay? Now, one of the things that I want to focus on here is our formula bar. So right at the top of right under your ribbon, right above the columns, is this area here that you call the formula bar. So the formula bar is where you're going to see the formulas that you've entered, whether it's text, whether it's numbers, whether it's functions that you've selected. The formula bar allows you to make changes, to edit. You can also use the formula bar to find functions if you weren't sure what function you needed to use. So we're going to take a look at that a little bit more closely shortly. But what I wanted to show here is that when you click in a cell, you will see the contents of that cell in the formula bar. So I have text here, so each of these are text. These here are numbers, and the numbers have been formatted to show as currency. All right, so I have here my plan numbers, my actual numbers, and in this cell, what we have is a user entered formula. So where I'm looking at B2 minus C2. And then for each of these, I have that formula that is calculating the difference between the planned and actual numbers for my little budget here. Now, below that in row 8, what I have is a function. So you'll see here equals sum, and then it has the range of cells within the parentheses to add the values of B2 to B7. And when I click on that, you'll notice that the Excel is highlighting the actual cells that are involved in that formula, all right, or in that function. So when I click and you can actually see this is the cells that will be included in my equals sum or my sum function. So there's several different ways to enter that formula. And one of the things that Excel has given us is a way to automate the sum function because since sum is used quite often in your spreadsheets. So let's say, for instance, here I have right now the user entered B8 minus C8, but I don't want to do that. I want to use the same function that is being used for the totals for the other columns. Now, if you look here in the editing section of the ribbon, there is an icon here. When I hover over it, you see that it says it has the word sum. So what it does, it says it automatically adds it up. When I click on sum, what it'll do is it's going to automatically insert the sum function into the formula bar. So right now you'll see instead of it saying B8 minus C8, what I'm doing now is I'm going to allow it to do this formula where I'm going to add the values that are in cells D2 to D7. And first thing you'll notice is that underneath it, it has kind of a format of what the function expects. So it expects one or more numbers, all right? And in this case, what it did is because it recognized that there were numbers above it in this column, it automatically selected those numbers as the input to the sum function. And now once I have this here, I can either hit my enter key or in the formula bar, I can hit the green check mark, all right? And then that will give me my answer. Same answer, of course, but now doing it just slightly differently than the way it was before, because now I wanted it to be the same as it was for these other columns. Now, another thing that you can do with this sum, the auto sum, if you right click next to it, instead of having just the sum function, you also have additional options. There's the average function. So rather than me having to type the average formula or type it the function in the cell, I can use this option and it'll work exactly the way the sum did. So when I click average, you'll see now it puts the average function in the cell and it will still refer to the same rows and columns, D2 to D7. So when I click enter or hit the check mark here, now I've got the average of the items that are in column D. I can also do count. So count will just count any cell that has a number in it. So when I do that, each of those have a number. So I should get 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My answer should be 6. And it is. Now, because it's formatted as a dollar as currency, then that's why you'll see the $6 there, even though it's not really $6. The other two items I can select in here, I can do the max, which will give me the number with the highest value. So when I click on that and hit enter, I get $20. And if I do min should give me the number with the lowest value. So again, when I click on min, I should see minus $50 as my answer, which I do. So that is how you would use the auto sum feature in Excel. And now you've got at least a chance to see a little bit of the workings of how the formulas and function works. Now, one of the other things you can do when you're doing these functions, and let's see, I'm going to try to do something a little here. I want to add another formula, and I'm going to use my insert function option. Now, the insert function option allows you to search for functions if you're not sure what function you might need. Or another thing you can do is you can look for a category of functions. So there might be, there's functions that relate to date and time, there's financial functions, math and trigonometry, statistical. We'll be looking at some of these going forward in future sessions, but this is just, again, another way for you to be able to see what other capabilities are within Excel. So if I decide, let's see, I'm not going to do a math one. Let's try to do let's see, a logical one. Okay, I'm going to do a logical one. So here, logical, it actually gives you, again, the syntax and what the purpose of the function is. So here's an if statement. If function checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if true and another value if false. I should have clicked on OK. OK is the one that I need. All right. So now you'll see if we use this option, it actually even gives you the ability to look at the information in your spreadsheet and select it so that you can use it for your to build your formula. So if you click on this arrow here, what that'll do is it'll shrink the dialog box and allow you to select a cell or a range of cells that you want to use for your formula. So let's just say I'm going to just choose, all right, I'm just going to choose this guy here. Okay. Now, once I select it, I click on that again to go back. Now, if I'm just going to use this option here, let's say I want to say logical test. If C4 is less than or greater than, I'll use greater than 150, all right, then I want you to say, I want to use the text. I'm going to say, okay, or I'm going to say hi, as we might have done before that we were showing in the other one. Hi, okay. If it's false, then I'm going to say low, okay. And I'm going to, and now this is actually even showing you the result of your formula. Okay, so if you use the function, let's see, what do they call that? The insert function feature, okay, that allows you to build a formula using this little box here. Another way to do that is if you look at the menu bar, there is the formulas menu, and in that ribbon, you also have not only the insert function feature, okay, which we just looked at, you have the auto sum, which is the same as what we saw on the home menu. This allows you also to click on more functions. So again, another way to get to that function, insert function option. But this also will show you, for instance, any formulas that you recently used, and it has the function library where you can see formulas based on specific categories. So here's a financial one, here's the logical one. You have different features for dealing with text, date and time, lookup and reference, and the math and trigonometry. We're going to look at all of these except for financial. We'll be looking at logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig. There is also additional functions here. There are many, many Excel functions. Probably you will never use all of them. You may use a lot of them. You will probably find the ones that work best for you and those will be the ones that you settle on or decide to use most because they meet the needs of what you're doing with your worksheet. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the beginning part here and take a quick look at the errors. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, you have the different error codes that you might see when you're working in Excel. The divide by zero error, if you are trying to do something where you're dividing by zero, wrong data. So in this case, if you tried to do text plus 5, plus is considered an operator to do addition. So it's going to think that you're trying to add text to the number 5, but since it can't add text, then you get the wrong data type. The reference invalid reference error could be if you deleted a cell. As I said, maybe you moved something to a different place and your formula is still referring to that cell. You might get this reference error. Name could be if you type something wrong with the name. I might be able to see if I go back to the budget sheet. Let's see if I go back to the budget sheet. I might be able to force that error. Let's see. So let's say now in my sum, let's say I tried to use the word sim or let me see, the letter I. Or O, either one would work. Okay. Or let's even try SM. Let's just see what happens. So if I hit the check mark, right, then I get that name error. So that's another one. And now, whenever you get these errors, you may also see a little yellow triangle next to it. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you what the error is. The formula contains unrecognized data. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that little arrow here, and I can see it says an invalid name error. Here is where if you wanted to trace any errors that you had, you might have formulas that are referring to cells in different parts of your worksheet. They might even be in different worksheets. Sometimes it can be difficult to track or trace where the error is coming from. So this is a way of being able to show you the steps that are being followed when you're doing your formula. There's other error checking options here. Let's see. So you do have some potential options of telling you what you need to look for. For instance, error checking here, enable background error checking, inconsistent calculated formulas and tables, so you can actually see which things should trigger an error as well. I'm just going to cancel out of that. And the other thing that we might be able to get is help on this error. So if you click on that, this might open up your Copilot, and Copilot, which is part of Microsoft 365, could also tell you what the issues are with your error. Okay, here are some ideas to get you started. So if I decided to say maybe I put my formula in there and have it evaluated to let me know what the error is, what the problem is. But in this case now, because we kind of know what this error is, we can actually just go back and correct it, put the U back in there, okay, and then that fixes our error. All right, so let's go back over to this here. Now, the other one, NA, where it says it's usually when you do some type of a lookup, when you're trying to find some information, maybe in a table, there's functions that allow you to do what they call lookups. This type of error sometimes happens when it can't find the value that you're looking for. We'll see more of that as we go into later chapters. But here's an example of one of the errors as well. Here's the divide by zero error. I have the number 10 here. I have the number 0 here. And in this cell, I have the formula equals A24 divided by B24. So A24 has a value 10, B24 has a value 0, so therefore you're getting an error. Underneath that, we have a formula that is called if error. So what this does, similar to the if function, and I called it formula, I should have called it function, the if error function, where if there is an error in that function, write the word error. Otherwise, it should just show what the actual value is. So we have divide by 0 here because we have invalid information. So again, we have the little yellow triangle there that should show us the divide by zero error. Show the calculation steps, ignore the error if I wanted to. It also here, I didn't go through here before, but I can also go and say edit in formula bar. I probably should have done that for the other one because then I could have updated the function name. In this case, this wouldn't help us because this is based on data as opposed to a problem with the function. So in this case, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put in the number 2 and then hit enter. And then you can see what changed. So once I put the 2 in there, there's no longer an error. So now you'll see here the A24 divided by B24 shows the result of the calculation. And then in this case, if error, the if error function is no longer true, so there is no longer an error. So now we just see the actual value that is in that for that cell. Now I'm going to try something here for a second. I want to change that to 0. Okay, that still stays. That just makes everything else 0, which is fine. But if we go back here again, we put that as 0, we see again we've got an error here, and we're showing the error here. Now, the if error that we're using here, we're going to look at that more in a later chapter because there are other types of error handling functions that we can use when we're building our formulas and functions in Excel. So we'll take a look more at that more in later sessions. Now, the next thing that we want to look at here is what we talked about with the cell referencing. We mentioned that there are 3 types of cell references. There's relative references, absolute references, and mixed references. Relative is the default, and I'll show you what I mean by that when we say something as a relative reference. All right, so let's say here we've got this example where we have 3 salespeople who have made some sales, okay, of a specific item. And for each month, they're supposed to get a percentage on what they sold. Okay, it's January, they'll get 10%, February, they'll get 12%, March, they'll get 13%. And then there is a sum to show how much they earned for each month. And then we'll also see so this will show what each salesperson, the total for the 3 months, and then down here we'll see the total for each month. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enter formula where I'm going to say equals, all right, and I'm going to click on the cell that I want to use, which in this case is B6, and then I want to multiply it by the percentage. Now when I hit enter, okay, I get $100. So that's what their commission is, $100 for Anna. And you'll see that that formula updated, that formula updated, and that formula updated. Now, one of the things that is beneficial about Excel is that I don't have to always retype these formulas for each cell. I can do copy and paste, and that's done a lot, especially if you have a spreadsheet with a lot of rows and you need to use the same formula for multiple rows. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a copy paste. So I'm going to do a Control C. And then because I want it to apply to the other 2 salespeople, I'm going to highlight those cells and then I'm going to hit enter. Now, that doesn't look right, does it? No, it doesn't. Because number 1, this one doesn't even show me a number. And this one is showing me 130,100. And I doubt very much that this person is going to earn that much commission. Okay. So here's what happened in this case. So I'm using B6, okay, which is the commission amount that Anna sold, and I'm multiplying it by this 10%. Now, when I copied that formula down for David, all right, it is referring to B7, okay, so that's correct because David's commission is in B7. However, the percentage that we're using moved, it shifted to C5, which is 0, which is blank. So it actually said, instead of it being B7 times 10%, it made it B7 times 0. So how do we fix that? So the first thing I would do is I want to make C4 absolute, because I want C4 to apply to not only Anna's commissions, I want it to apply to David's and Susan's as well. And let's take a look at what happened with Susan's, because in her case, B8 is a commission, but instead of it using the commission in B4, it used B6, which is C6, I should say. See, it's referring to C6, which is 100. So it took her 1,300 and multiplied it by 100 and came up with 130,000. And we know that is definitely not correct. We wanted to refer to 10%, which is 0.10, and that's what we're going to ensure happens for everyone. So before I copy that cell down, I want to make C4 absolute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my formula bar, and then I'm going to use the F4 key. When I click on F4 or tap on F4, what that does is it puts the dollar signs in, and in this case, it puts it in front of both the column and the row, and it makes that cell absolute in this formula. Okay. Now I can, if I wanted to change this to make it a mixed reference, as I mentioned before, if I tap on the F4 again, now you'll see it puts a dollar sign in front of the row and not the column. All right, but that's not what I want here. Or if I do it again, it puts the dollar in front of the column and not the row, which is also not what I want. And then the fourth time I tap it, it takes it all away. But in this case, I want it to be absolute for the entire column and row. And I'm going to hit enter. Now, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which was copy that formula. I'm going to copy it down, and now I get the right results. Because now I see here B6 times C4, B7 times C4, B8 times C4. Now, wouldn't it be great if I could just take that formula and copy it across for every month? Sounds like it would be a good thing to do. And I'm going to try it. Let's see what happens when I do it, if I get the results that I'm looking for. Okay, Control C. There we go. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to just highlight the first row, row 6, in columns D and E. And then I'm going to hit enter. And does not look exactly right, does it? Because now, not only do I have, instead of it being 100%, it's only 10% here, and only, or I should say $10, and here only $1. So what happened in this case? Okay, so when I took this formula here and copied it to column D, instead of it referring to the same quantity sold column, which is B, it shifted it again to C, because since it was a relative reference, it didn't maintain the cell that I needed when I moved it to the next column. So I need to make another change to this formula. All right. So what I really need to do now is I think I need to make B6 fixed as well. So let's now do the same thing we did before for B6. So I'm going to do the F4. All right, yeah, let's get back there again. Okay, I'm going to do the F4. All right, F4. So now B6 is fixed and C4 is fixed. All right, so that's the first thing. So now I'm going to copy that down, copy this formula here, doing Control C, and copy it down to here. Okay, and then, okay, no, that didn't work either. Oh no, that doesn't work either. Why is that? Because now I'm back to making B6 the default for everybody, and we know that's not correct. So now here's where the mixed references come into play. Okay, so instead of having B6 be fixed so that it also will apply to these cells, I'm going to make B6 mixed. So I want column B to be fixed, but I don't need the rows fixed. So I'm only going to use the $ in front of the B. And so now when I copy that formula down, all right, okay, so I'm going to copy this down here. All right, now I am referring to B6 here, B7 here, B8 here. Okay. But I still have one other problem. My other problem, okay, is if you look here, I'm still referring to C4, which is this cell. But for February, I need to be referring to this cell, to D4, okay, not C4. So, one more time, we're going to make a change to our original formula. So, instead of having the column be fixed, okay, in this case, we want the row fixed. So, we're using mixed references throughout the entire formula or table. Okay, so let's start again. Here is the first cell that we did where we're using column B and row 6, and we want C4. So we want to get the commission amount for Anna for what she sold here, and then we want to see that for each month, and each month has a different commission amount. So I'm going to copy this formula down first. Okay, so I want to see it here and here. All right, so now we know that's correct for each person because here we're referring to B7, which is the right commission amount, which is now referring to the commission percent in cell C4. And then for Susan, we've got the B8 quantity sold multiplied by 10% commission. Now, when I take that formula, and I can do it this way, I'm just going to copy those 3 cells, and I'm going to copy and highlight across as I did before, starting in D6 and E6. And when I enter, now I have the correct amount. And let's see how this changed once we did that copy and paste. So here we have B6 times C4. Here, we're still referring to B6, which is correct, but now it's being multiplied by D4, okay, which is correct. And here, referring to B6, it's now being multiplied by E4. And then for the next row, we have B7, which is correct, times C4, B7 times D4, B7 times E4, and then finally we have B8, which is referring to or multiplying by C4, D4, and E4. And then each of these now, we have the sum of each item here, the total for each column for each month, total for each person, and the grand total for the commission amounts that were earned by these 3 salespeople. So you can see now how important having the cell reference is. If you don't have the right cell reference, your formulas could end up being completely off. So the thing is really evaluating and taking a look at the information that you have in your spreadsheet, your worksheet, and then determining if everything is being placed correctly. I have another example, and this one I'm not going to do the whole thing because it is pretty long, but let's say now I wanted to just use this one cell here to calculate the commission for everybody in this spreadsheet. Right now we have, let's see, I'm just going to hold the shift and the control key and go control all the way to the bottom. And then I can see that there are 422 people or rows in my data here. Okay, so I want to calculate for all of these people. All right, just go back up to the top again, Control Home. I want to know what the commission amount will be for all of these people here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to say, use my equal sign. I'm going to click on that cell here. I'm going to hit the asterisk for multiplication, click on the percent, and then hit enter. So for this person, their commission is 32,622.60. Now again, if I wanted to copy that formula down, all right, let's choose, I'm just going to do it for the first couple here. If I do that, right off the bat, we see we have a problem. So first off, the first one is, remember the value error that we talked about before? In this case, we're getting a value error because it says value used in the formula is of the wrong data type. And that's because when we copied the cell or the formula down, it's referring to C2 instead of C1. And C2 has text in it. And because it has text, it can't do the calculation, so you get the value error. The other one now is because instead of it taking the 10%, it's multiplying by what's in C3, which is 32,000, and it's multiplying this 222,000 by 32,000. And now your value, your formula is coming up with 7 million. And you can't see this because it's so large. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to double click on the in between the columns there so that it expands it so you can actually see what the value is. And we know that is absolutely incorrect. So how do we fix this? In this case, we are okay with using an absolute reference, okay? Because there's only one cell that we need to refer to in this column. We only need to refer to the value in C1. So I can actually now copy this value, okay, or this formula. So if I do a Control C, and I'm just going to do it for the first two here before I do, I'm in the wrong spot here. Okay, here, and I hit enter, and now you can see my formula looks a lot better. Just so that you know, there is a quick way to do this if you want to do this for all the cells in this column. If I go to the lower right corner of that cell, you see that big plus sign that comes up, or it's big on mine because my cursor is big, but if I double click on it, I'm using Excel's data fill feature. So what it's going to do, it's going to copy that formula down to all the 420 odd rows that I have in this spreadsheet. All right, so I'm going to double click that. Let's see. Oh, all right. Why did that not work? Let's try it again. Ah, there we go. Had to do it on the bottom one. All right, so once I clicked on that one, it actually copied the formula down, and I'm just going to hit Control and the down arrow so you can see I'm down at the bottom of my list. And everything looks good because my formula includes that C1, that absolute reference to C1. So, and that ensures that all of my formulas come out correctly. So in the other example, we had to use mixed cell references. And you can see in one case we used the column was absolute or fixed, the row was not. In the other case, the column was not fixed, but the row was fixed because we needed to refer to that specific row. And in this case, we're referring to one cell that needs to remain fixed for all the formulas. And you'll see here now we have the one that has the $ in front of both the C and the 1.
Congratulations on completing this free Excel formulas and functions tutorial. You have now built a strong foundation in Excel. If you would like to continue, check out the link in the description. Our full Excel formulas and functions course takes you beyond fundamentals into advanced functions, logical formulas, lookup functions, automation techniques, and real-world Excel workflows used in business and data analysis. You'll find the full course linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you inside the course.